It's 2 o'clock. Come on, let's get that 2 o'clock energy. We know what that looks like at work, right? Yeah, we need a protein bar or something at about this time. Welcome to New York City. If you're not from New York City, I'm the Queens Deputy Borough President, Vice President of Queens, New York City. Very delighted to be here and very delighted to have this type of a conversation. We talk a lot about the synergy amongst our private, public, and community partners, and what better place to have a discussion like that right here. So I'm pretty sure that the panel moderator and the panels want to hear from you, so start thinking about those questions. We don't solve in silos, we solve comprehensively, we solve collectively, etc. So what I'd like to do today is introduce you to Floods to Fires, Innovating Emergency Management, and having a track to be able to do that. Our moderator and presenter today is Katherine Pfeil, Inframappa Vice President of Rochester. Katherine, take it away. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for everybody joining us. We are super excited to have this conversation today. We do want to keep it very conversational, so please come up with your questions if you have any. We're happy to answer them. So as she mentioned, my name is Katherine. I am with Inframappa. My background is in technology, and I currently work in a digital twin space, so we are experts in digital twins, and so I'm super excited to kind of talk about how this relates to this emergency management and innovation in this space. So I will let the crew here go through and just quickly introduce themselves, and then we'll get into some questions. I do have a lot of questions prepared, but we would love to hear from you guys too, so we'll kind of take it as they come. So Ali, you want to start?
Sure, thanks. Hey everyone, pleasure to be here. Ali Asad Hassan. I'm a business development manager with AWS, Amazon Web Services. I focus on partner solutions in the IoT smart city space. For us, that basically means solution vendors that are building niche public safety, traffic management, all the different verticals solutions, and they're using AWS as their cloud provider to do that. We also work directly with fire department, police department, and cities with their IT groups to take those workloads, migrate those to the cloud. But yeah, excited to be here and looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. Christina?
Good afternoon. I'm Christina Farrell. I'm the first Deputy Commissioner at New York City Emergency Management, which is a city department. We coordinate interagency emergencies across the city. There's a couple every day, every minute. But we really look at larger emergencies, like you said, floods, fires, a lot of novel events that have been happening. We had our first drought in 20-something years a few months ago. And we also do a lot of work around preparedness, mitigation, resiliency, recovery.
And Brian O'Neill, I'm a Deputy Chief with Clark County Fire Department. And I manage the division of the fire department that is the Office of Emergency Management. Also function as the emergency manager for Clark County. Just for a little bit of perspective, Clark County makes up about half of the Las Vegas Valley, and then also an additional 7,000 square miles outside of Las Vegas. We are a fire department, and we have 32 stations, 5 battalions, about 800 personnel in suppression. Additionally, I was the communications working group chair as part of our lead up to Formula One for the last 2 years, and Super Bowl 58 that was held at Allegiant Stadium.
Thank you. So just to kind of set the stage, we do have a really unique situation here with the team, obviously on the technology side, and then also 2 very different walks of life in the emergency management, having New York City all the way to Las Vegas, the desert, to being here in New York. So I'm going to start off with you, Ali. I do have an initial question, very high level, but do you think it is a priority in your current role in what you see today in governments? Do you think it's a priority for them to have their assets properly mapped, all their IoT devices connected? Do you see them taking the initiative for the priority, or what is that? What is your day-to-day, and how does that look for these current governments?
Yeah, from a technology perspective,
yeah,
I think 100%. I think it's important to have all your assets connected, have visibility into it, because you can't protect what you can't see or you're not aware of, right? So it's really important to have everything from the infrastructure perspective to sensors, devices, everything connected, everything reporting. That way you know what condition they're in, whether it's evacuation use cases, whether it's water management and stuff like that. What I see working with cities and customers is from a solution vendor perspective, there's a lot of companies that are building solutions to address those needs. Our infrastructure in the US is a little outdated, right? It needs a little looking after. So there are gaps, but I think there's technology companies that are out there that are making it efficient to connect to those devices, get status from that data. But then I think it's also important to not just look at it from an IoT lens, but be able to connect that to other parts of the department as well, right? So if I have traffic data, if I have population data, if I have environmental data, how do I correlate all these data silos together to get a true picture of how the city is being operated, and in case of an emergency, how do I manage that? How do I plan evacuation routes and stuff like that? So yes, I think it's really important to connect those devices, but then also connect that data set to other data sets that could potentially unlock new insights for the city.
Okay, and with your current role within AWS, how are you and your team, how does AWS go about helping these agencies elevate that to the next level? I mean, from a maybe basic paper world all the way into this digital infrastructure. What is Amazon doing to help with that? Yeah, so
we have two route to markets in the space. One obviously is directly working with the cities, IT groups to help enable the solutions. And there's value in building solutions on the AWS cloud because it gives you the scalability, the redundancy, cost optimization, ability to take small projects and scale them up really fast, right? And be able to save costs over there. The other, like I mentioned, is our partner solutions. The other thing we do is we work with an organization called Pfeil, which is out of Europe, but they create this framework for open data sharing. And on that, we've built something called the Garnet framework, which is essentially a context broker in the middle. So you can ingest data from multiple sources, from data silos, based on open source protocols, open API, ingest it in, create some sort of contextual awareness of that data, and then be able to send that data to the data consumers. These could be your digital twins. This could be a dashboard, digital application. It could be a mobile application. So now we're enabling that any-to-any communication without you having to be locked into multiple vendors or a single vendor, right? And if a new use case comes in, you can just plug that into your data framework. So I think it's really important. It's really important to create that framework for data, get clean data, because clean data and good data will give you good outputs. But then going back to what you were saying, right? We, as technologists, we get excited and we dive into this art of the possible world. But if you kind of pull back, there's simple, we were talking about this earlier, there's simple use cases that could also be, you could apply AI and stuff. One example is just intelligent document processing. A lot of cities we work with, agencies still have a lot of their processes, workflows, which are running on paper. Just taking that, digitizing it, bringing it to the cloud environment, now reduces the man hours to look at those case files and stuff. And also now, because you have it digitized, you can start seeing patterns and trends across that to say, hey, we're seeing this kind of a trend or a pattern between that, right? Another example I'll give is call centers, 911 call centers. So call centers typically have a contact center solution. We have one called Amazon Connect. Applying AI into that now gives you things like sentiment analysis. What is the sentiment of the person calling? You can do intelligent routing of the calls to say that 911 calls go to an operator. Non-emergency calls get routed to maybe a 311 dispatch or something like that, right? So there's intelligent things we can do in our day-to-day repetitive use cases that will have immediate impact. And then there's the art of the possible stuff where we can connect everything in the world and have everything talk to each other. So I think both are equally important.
And I think that's a good point, is to think about, being able to start small and having those smaller use cases. These cities can be massive. I mean, just looking from our panel here, we're working with some of the largest cities in the country. And how do we dive into something so big? We have to start with bits and pieces and bring all that together into one location. It's a lot of buy-in, right? There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of hierarchy and things that we have to sift through. But you have to get into it with that first bit and first piece. So I'm going to skip down to Brian for a second. So Brian, being in your role in the fire department for Clark County, how important is it to have fast access to mapped infrastructure for emergencies? I know we talked about this extensively, but how important for your response time, for your team's time, for your safety, all those things? Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. So when I was the assistant chief of operations for Clark County, it was easy for me because our rules and regs, SOPs, contracts, labor negotiation stuff was pretty much consistent for 23 years for me. And now stepping into this new role, I'm having to digest our hazard mitigation plan, which is like 400 pages, our Clark County's emergency operations plan, which is 150 pages. And then I have to communicate that to all of our ESFs, which are all of our county departments that serve different emergency tasks, break that down for them in a way that they can understand their roles, responsibilities, and their points of contact, and make sure that the county's COOP is up to date. And that's a huge task. And I need the chatbot to like streamline that for me, right? But fire departments, when I first came on, there were engineers that had hand-drawn maps of their properties in their area and the entrances to MGM or Caesar's Palace or Stardust, which doesn't exist anymore. And we've really turned into an organization that has to use data to just navigate, get our resources to the closest call. We're no longer just reliant on radio systems to communicate. So much is driven through CAD and access to information through the CAD. We are a data-driven organization, and we have to use that for decision-making and operational coordination and planning. And just as an example, talking about data silos, 2 years ago we had the York fire that came up through the Mojave National Forest, up through San Bernardino County, up to the edge of Clark County. And there's a small community of about 400 people called Searchlight that's out in that area. And so as we were looking at the fire progress, and I was communicating with our fire management officer from BLM in Southern Nevada, he said, "Hey, there's nothing to worry about. It's nowhere near Searchlight. You're going to be fine." And I said, "Okay." He goes, "I'll call you if anything changes." And in the morning he called me and he said, "This fire ran 10 miles overnight. It's right outside Searchlight. It's time to be concerned." And as I'm processing, how are we going to try to evacuate that community and where are we going to put them? We don't have shelters set up. We haven't even communicated anything about this. The water district contacts us and says, if the fire, even if Searchlight is okay, if the fire burns the pump station that serves the well that feeds Searchlight, no one's going to have water, and we don't know when it's going to be able to be turned back on. And so I'm like, well, where are your pumps? I've never seen this before. I don't have any of that information. And so they were able to give us some GPS coordinates, communicate that to the incident management team, and within a day they're doing retardant drops, cutting line, protecting those sites. This is critical infrastructure now that we didn't know a day ago. But this is an example of the type of information that's siloed, and if it was shared to us ahead of time, we would be much better prepared for these emergencies that occur.
Thank you for explaining that, and I think that story really resonates with the one-time sensitive, situations that you both are experiencing, especially with the Las Vegas Strip. I'm curious, from your perspective, what technological improvements do you think would boost this? Obviously, the data sharing and the just having a digital twin of this infrastructure. You mentioned the chat box. Is there anything else that would help in your day-to-day from a technological perspective that you think could improve your doing your job and the safety of all your residents?
I think we're a very AI skeptical organization right now.
That's fair.
I think that's safe to say. So really, like we're talking about, just putting documents into the cloud and being able to query for information, information sets that are unmanageable in their current form. That would be just that small win that gets us started. And I think that's the most important thing, is building trust and allowing some of these wins to generate some momentum for technology advancement.
Thank you. So let's pop over to Christina. I have a couple questions regarding kind of your processes. So being in the emergency management space, I'm curious, what role do emerging technologies like IoT, AI, digital twins, how do they play a role in coordinating, this multi-agency, multi-department, response that you're responsible for? Where does that live in your role today?
Yeah, so we, emergency management, we're about 250 people, which is huge for emergency management. For New York City, when you have 40,000 police officers, thousands of firefighters, 100,000 teachers, we're super tiny. And when we go into emergency mode, we go into 12-hour shifts. So, that kind of cuts your workforce in half there. But we're also, for the government people here, we're not, by and large, civil service. We all, and so we can ask a lot of our staff, which we do. Obviously, it's emergency management. But also, we can try different things, within the city. Our CIO is here. He likes to push the envelope a little bit. But, looking at things, I've been in emergency management a long time, but we're never quick enough, maybe for the press, for City Hall, for all of, the consumers of our information, for the oversights. And so just things like you were talking about, getting note-taking, done quickly. One thing we know when we get into an emergency, some of the situations you've described, is the first information is usually always wrong, right? And the data is, we had a Legionnaires outbreak in the Bronx a few years ago, and everybody was frustrated just because everything we were getting, and they were like, well, your GIS had to do faster. Our GIS is amazing. If we're not giving them good data, what are they going to do? So really looking at that piece, and like you said, trying to do some small things. I mean, for me, the note-taking, because that's all the calls I'm getting. Where's the information? Where's the tweet? What can we put out? So it's not small, but maybe incremental. Also looking at, our, I don't think our team is getting bigger in the near future. And so looking at, we do a lot of reporting. We do a lot of grant reporting. We have a lot of legislative requirements and legal requirements, and that are there things within that space without sensitive information, that we can pull together and do it more quickly. I will say another space that we've really been working in, which has been really helpful, is drones and looking at that. We've been using them for lots of different things. This morning we had a simulation of an airplane accident in Staten Island, and how would we manage those different pieces. But the oceans are getting cleaner, so now we have sharks closer to the beach. And so we had a task force where we could do that, looking at, you'd be amazed how many sharks are right outside the New York City beaches, but kind of getting ahead of that. We've done messaging through our drones last summer when there were some floods coming. It's not perfect, but it's, and some people are, the government can be technology adverse, but then also the communities. Do they want us in their community telling us that this area is going to flood? What languages are we doing in? That kind of thing. So, like you said, it can be overwhelming, but we're trying to look at different pieces, try some things out, and see what might help us down the road.
Yeah, one thing I'll add, and Brian and Christina, you both mentioned this, a lot of times when we work with cities and counties, et cetera, if they're new to the cloud in general, right, our usually our thing is, hey, let's start small, and let's maybe look at some non-mission critical applications, right, so that maybe leave those where they are, start with some smaller use cases like the document processing, something like that, and then let's migrate that to the cloud, earn some trust, right? There's a learning gap. Sometimes you have to fill that learning gap, go through those motions, and then the value of being in the cloud is that it's very easy, or fairly easy, to take a pilot project and then quickly scale it up, because that's the power the cloud gives you. With AWS, you can scale your resources. There's the built-in disaster recovery, stuff like that. So with IoT, a lot of projects just get stuck in pilot phase, and it's very hard to get them across, right? And there's other reasons for that, not just technology, but one aspect is, hey, if there was a way to quickly scale these, and AWS Cloud can provide that, then it's a little easier to move those to production and try to get some real value out of them.
Yeah, and I would also just add to that, and Brian touched on this, we do a lot of planning, we do a lot of exercises, what if, but a lot of our innovations or our things come in the actual emergency. Like the city of New York did not have a widespread work from home policy until the week before COVID started and the schools closed and everybody was home. Some of the work we've done with drones, somebody high up heard like, yeah, you should do some messaging. And so within 12 hours, we're out doing that. So sometimes you need that push. It's a pilot, but it's also like just in real time, right? So some of these things will probably come if we have something that we weren't 100% ready for.
A compelling event that drives it.
Yeah. And so don't let the crisis go to waste, right? Push out what you wanted to do that was caught up with the lawyers or with procurement or whoever.
Well, and we try to distinguish events and incidents, right? So events are like all the stuff that's happening all the time in Las Vegas, concerts, sporting events, what have you. And that's the time when we're demoing, trying new things. We've pre-planned every aspect of it, and now we're going to introduce this new variable and see if it works, right? And crisis communication is one of the hardest things. It's a core capability for us, and something that we should be really good at. And we probably will not allow AI to start crafting messages because we would need to assure the validity and reliability of that message. But it can allow us to conduct hazard assessments of facilities and processes and things that are likely to occur, to where we could have a polygon that's already shaped out to deliver IPOs or WIAs or things like that, and just speed up the process, because that's the one thing that we try to do, is be fast and accurate. And so using AI to speed up some of those processes, even if we're further validating that message, is going to be really important.
Thanks, Brian. I think a lot of the cities and towns that we speak to, that aren't at the scale of maybe New York, I guess this question's for Christina, really. What technologies, and you may have an unlimited supply being with a large city, but what technologies do you think would be helpful that maybe you're not dabbling into yet? Is there any avenue that you as a city and you as a leader in this department think that could be helpful to continue growing and improving processes? Is there anything out there at this time that you're like, yeah, this would be great?
Probably all of the above.
Yeah, okay, great. Well.
Yeah, I mean, the city does have a lot of resources, but we also have insatiable need, right? And when you look at all the different things, like, I'm curious with both of you, we have many, many language needs. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of requirements, like Notify NYC, which is our main, emergency messaging app. We have about 1.3 million people on it. That's in 14 languages. But then, we had a huge tragic fire in the Bronx a couple years ago, and it was in the West African community. And I've been in the city 30 years, there were dialects I had never heard of. And we were able, to find some people who spoke that and everything. But it's, and sometimes maybe having, you have something and it's available to some people, but then you want it available to all. And I will say one thing, maybe because I'm not the youngest person in our office anymore, but one thing that we also go back and forth with is it's great to have all this technology, all of this, but a lot of our vulnerable populations, people that are living in the coastal flood zones, people that don't have air conditioning, they turn on their cell phone to make a call, and then they turn it back off. Or they're not on X or Twitter, or they're not doing these things. So how do we balance? It's great to have all these, but sometimes people that have access to a lot of different technologies, they're probably going to figure it out. But with our very limited resources, is our job to look at how do we keep landlines going, and how do we keep, we'll do digital print ads, or print ads and digital ads, because people get their newspaper delivered. So kind of balancing that.
It's just interesting you mentioned that we're actually working with a city in Florida, which has the same problem.
Probably New Yorkers then.
Yeah.
Retired to Florida.
Probably. But they do have a vulnerable elderly population that, you're right, they don't have access to Twitter, X, and they're not checking their feeds and stuff like I do obsessively. And even the cell phones, they're not smartphones a lot of time, right? And the city's like, fire department actually is like, how do we reach out to them and at least just get a status on, do they need help? Do they need evacuation? So they're thinking out of the box. One thing they're exploring is, can we just take city-provided controlled mini Alexa devices that they furnish in their houses or spaces, and then in case of an emergency, a screen pops up that says, are you okay? Interactive, right? Yes. Mm-hmm. Do you need evacuation? Yes or no? So it's just simple stuff like that. That way it's not something they have to reach out to, it's just right there, flashes a screen. So things like those are being explored to see how can we not leave that population behind, make sure their needs are addressed as well.
Yeah, we've brought that up with the federal government with wireless emergency alerts. Like, could it be two ways? So you could say, do you need help, or, those kind of things.
Yeah, and I think as the low Earth orbit satellite system overlays over our cities more and more, the ability for people to communicate in different ways is going to just improve. we'll no longer have power outages and fiber cuts and cellular service go down and not still be able to receive messages from people. I think it's just, the innovation is just moving so quickly.
Just a lot of debris out in space.
Well, thank you for that. We do have a couple minutes left. I do want to just ask, are there any questions in the audience? And I apologize, it is incredibly difficult to see you guys with this light. So does anybody have any questions? I do have a couple more, but I'd love to hear from you guys. Love it.
It seems like emergency management has so much human needs, like you have all these people out in the world, in the actual world doing real work, but then there's also this knowledge work component that's behind the scenes. Do you feel like the sort of large language model stuff can help with the processes, the sort of back office, basically, without sort of, trying to automate anyone's job, on scene?
Yeah, no, for sure. The question, if you couldn't hear it, was how do you balance like back office, large language model things with the human component? And so, for us, we will, if there is a large fire, a vacate in the city, which there is, pretty often, we will go to a school, we'll open up a reception center, start to get the Red Cross there to get people into hotels. But, that's all built on the back end and the different pieces. And also, how do we train? In New York City, we do have a lot of emergencies. We do have a lot of chances for people to train. But, sometimes, we talk about Hurricane Sandy, and that, really was one of the big markers in my career. Like, how many people have gone through emergency management since Hurricane Sandy? Like, so many. Even now we talk about COVID, a lot of our line staff have been here a year, 2 years. So doing some simulations, doing things based off of that to learn, but then not, missing that piece. One thing I know with the Hurricane Sandy, because our EOC is beautiful, but it has no windows, and most of New York City after Sandy was back within a few days to their regular life, and so it was maybe hard for people that lived in Manhattan or lived in Brooklyn to understand months out the devastation that was still in Staten Island, in the Rockaway, in the coastal areas. So, having some of that where people can understand, they can model, exercise, that definitely is helpful for us.
Yeah, I think we talked about this a little bit. I think it's important to see AI, LLMs, FMs, everything, AI, as an enhancement tool for productivity to the human rather than a replacement, right? It's really, as much as we automate everything and apply AI, it's still important to have a human in the loop to verify some of this stuff. So I think the value for the human is definitely there. It's just, can we use AI to increase productivity and then have that human focus on more critical things like actually responding to the emergency, right? Instead of having to go through case files and do stuff like that. So I think it's how we use it that's going to be really important.
And to kind of, oh, sorry.
I have one more question.
Okay, yeah.
Similar to this.
Yeah.
So you mentioned about SOS using AI, right? SOS to send messaging. I was curious, since it's something we as humans are pretty good at, how would you use AI to prioritize allocating resources to different places?
I don't know. I'm not, I would imagine resource allocation, planning, predictive angle of that could be used based on historical data. How do you actually use it on a day-to-day process? I'm not doing that. You guys probably are, so maybe you know.
So one thing, and I know in talking with our fire commissioner, because they're looking at 911 calls, and there's a lot of calls, he's looking at predictive AI, and can we figure out where the calls are going to come from, because our EMS resources are very limited and becoming more limited. And so looking at historical data, you can start to predict, where the 911 calls are going to come from, so you don't have even resources. You have the resources close to where they are. So that seems like an exciting and very necessary, innovation.
Yeah. So our stations and our engine companies are at specific locations, right? And we can't move them because of the contracts of roving people out and things like that. But a change across the fire service is contracting ambulances. They're cheaper and they can handle the majority of the calls that we go to. We're about 85% EMS calls in Las Vegas, and we can put those wherever the calls are likely to occur and just post them at different intersections and different locations to speed up that response. Additionally, just translation in the 911 center, being able to get accurate information from callers, that's really important. That's gonna change a lot for us. You know, these are both international cities with people that speak all different languages, and being able to understand the problem and get the right resource to the call the majority of the time, that speeds up not only a response to the call, or vertical response up into our hotels, and just making sure that we are just meeting our response time thresholds, you know, providing the best service we can.
Right here in front.
Is there a legacy information system that you depend on in your day-to-day operations that you would happy to have innovated and updated that will have impact for the teams?
The legacy information system, like our pre-planning system.
Yeah. So I think the question was, is there a legacy system? Do they have, so do either one of you have a legacy system that you use on a day-to-day that's, you know, impactful in your,
And which would benefit from innovation? And
would it be a,
I mean, I would guess 90% of the cities infrastructure, and different cities because of different. You know, one thing I've seen is there's a different system for every, you know, for timesheets, and just because there also we have the administrative side. There's, you know, for timesheets, and then for approving, you know, spending things, and then for they have to go into this. Like, why couldn't there be one system, you know, like what Amazon or Google or something, where you can go and have all the different pieces, and you don't have to have the different logins, and people are coming to me, I don't have the charms report. I'm like, I don't even know what that means.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
So, you know, maybe, but I mean, that's a huge undertaking, obviously, to try to get all the systems in the city to talk to each other, but that would make our lives easier.
And then having that available through CAD, to where our MCT in the units is just pulling information out of that cloud server that has pertinent information. Right now, you know, we have legacy handwritten PDF forms for pre-planning, right? But we're working to transition that into digital information that's available on a map for our responding resources. And then being able to pull information that we don't currently have, but it's out there from private sector, you know, partnerships, and being able to have that available for our response as well.
yeah, I think a big part of that is, you know, already keeping the tools that you have. You showed me a really cool tool that you guys use, but also how do you enhance that? How do you have locational data? How do you have those PDFs within that locational data so that you can, you know, now visualize everything from a click of a button? You're standing at a building, you click on the building, and all that information pops up, so it's at the tip of your fingers right then, instead of having to, you know, I mean, paper's scary because that takes time, right? So how do we automate that? How do we read through those documents with AI? There's just so many different avenues, but it's again that overarching, how do we bring all this stuff into one generalized location? And I think that's exactly what what we're trying to spread the good word on, is, you know, how do we get there, and you know, what is the path of least resistance?
I think also for the city and for all entities, you know, you're also afraid, okay, so I put everything in the cloud or in the space, then is it going to get hacked? Am I going to have a denial of service? At least if I have paper, if I have a file, or, you know, I have it, and the bad guys aren't getting it, right? So there's also that piece.
We touched on this. Ironically, it feels like paper has more risk associated with it, because with backup perspective and stuff. Yeah, but there's ways to approach that from the cloud perspective.
Oh, for sure.
It's the chicken and the egg, unfortunately. Are there any other questions?
Just to drill down a little bit further into the previous point about predictive AI. So I hear that there's hesitancy about AI in emergency response, but this happens before the emergency, or just data analytics in general, like abnormality prediction or trend analysis. So what's the usage of that like right now? How far has it been implemented, and is there hesitancy for that?
I don't believe that we are using predictive AI, but I'll give you an example of one that we have, and maybe you can solve this for us. So we have approximately, Nevada is one of the most seismically active states. We have we have more earthquakes than just about anybody. There's a large fault line that runs through the east side of Las Vegas, and there's a big area of potential damage as a result of that, just due to the soil conditions. We have approximately 15,000 unreinforced masonry buildings, which are susceptible to damage. It's estimated a 5.0 earthquake would damage 75% of those. A 6.0 earthquake would damage 100% of those. And we would have to shelter everyone that lives in those buildings for some period of time until we could conduct remediation on those and they could move back home, right? So where are those buildings located? Who would be the most likely person that we would need to shelter based on socioeconomic demographic factors? Where should those shelters be located? What available facilities do we have there? And what's the likelihood? Because risk is just probability, right? Probability and then what is the consequence of that? So what would be the likelihood of us having to undergo that operation? Who would we likely encounter? How many people would that be? And what would be the likelihood of a 6.0 earthquake in that fault, right? So, I mean, I don't really understand all of the elements, but that's a future plan, right?
Awesome.
I think for us, we would take that, but we would say coastal storm. And we would look at, all of those things. We have models, obviously, we work with the Army Corps, and we work with a lot of others, but we're also, as people have probably heard, we had a lot of asylum seekers, migrants come to New York City, and due to our laws and everything, we were housing them. And all emergencies have silver linings, right? You get to practice things. And so we got to, one of the things that we practiced used was using our stockpile for not a hurricane. So we could do restocking and getting things around and everything. But our models, a lot of our hurricane models and the human services piece, all of that, we rebuilt our plan after Hurricane Katrina, and then we certainly built it after Hurricane Sandy. But now it's been 13 years. Twitter was like a tiny little baby, right, back then. I shudder to think. But so we're starting to think. We think more people would evacuate just because people have seen what can happen. I think people are more aware of emergencies and everything. But also, New York City is in a housing crisis, so we're building more and more housing. A lot of that housing is in those neighborhoods, so that's adding to it. And just looking at all those pieces, so I would like to do the same thing, but do it on coastal storm. And who would evacuate? Where would they go? Who would need city services? All of that.
Thank you. Well, I apologize, guys. We are at time, so we do have to wrap up. But I just want to say thank you to the three of you for standing up here with me and answering all these questions. I will be around if there's any questions personally for me. I'm sure they'll be bopping around as well for the last couple hours we have left. But we appreciate your time, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much.